John Debney, you were the composer of The Jungle Book. Before we get started about your work on it, I hear that you have kind of an interesting history with Disney. Could you talk a little about that?
I do. Nice to meet you guys. Nice to meet you, Zach. I love your
Thank you.
show. Love being on with you live. This is cool. I have a kind of long history with Disney, which started when my dad worked for Disney for about 40 years. He was believe it or not, he was the clapper boy on Snow White. So I go pretty far back. He started working there as a 16-year-old kid and worked there for 40 years on many projects and TV shows and films. And then, so I grew up kind of, I guess you'd say, in the Disney family, and I was sort of a Disney brat, as it were. I mean, when you're of an age and you're 8 years old, and we would go to the studio and there would be Walt Disney, and we would sort of run around the back lot with the Disney kids. And so I had this really cool, idyllic sort of Disney childhood, as you might say. And then over the years, started working for Disney. I started getting into music, got my degree, and I actually started working at the studio right out of college as a sort of copyist and a jack of all trades. Started to do arranging for the theme parks, and one thing led to another. Left the studio and started to freelance. A number of years ago, out of college, I was at the studio for about 4 years. And then the rest is sort of history. I would do things periodically for them. I'd work on a number of films for them. I'd do TV shows for them. And lo and behold, at the end of the journey came this amazing opportunity to work on Jungle Book with my friend and colleague director, Jon Favreau. So it was at the end of a journey, as it were. I think in some way it was sort of the culmination of a lot of history with them. And I'm so grateful and thankful for that.
Absolutely. So when it came to scoring The Jungle Book, this is one of the most beloved animated films in Disney's canon. And as you said, Jon Favreau has reinvented it for a new generation. Did you feel any kind of pressure at all having to compete with this iconic music? Or?
Well, great question. Absolutely. I was petrified, to be honest with you. You can imagine, excited, petrified. I remember getting off the phone with Jon, just being so thrilled. I think I was going off to the Emmys or something a couple years ago. And I remember being so thrilled. And then the very next thought was, oh my God, what am I going to do? Because it is such a beloved show. I think that most people would always point to Jungle Book as being one of their favorite animated films that Disney has done. So going into it, there were high expectations, and Jon knew that too, by the way. So the wonderful thing about Jon Favreau is that he guided me every step of the way, and we would look at early renderings of scenes, and we'd talk about what was going on or what would go on in the scene. And so the process was wonderful. Along the way, Jon Favreau came up with the idea of, we've got to maybe include a couple of these iconic songs. How can you not include Bare Necessities and Wanna Be Like You? So Jon and I had long conversations about what that might be, what those might sound like. Again, paying the homage to the original, and yet having some fun with it and updating them. What happened with Wanna Be Like You was Jon called me one day and he said to me, what would you think, Jon, about having Richard Sherman, if he's willing, to write a new verse to the song? And as I was laughing, I go, are you kidding? Great. And he goes, do you think Richard would like to do that? And I go, oh my God, I think he'd be thrilled by it. So Jon called Richard, Dick, and who's a really good friend of mine. And, I've known him for many years. And Jon sort of pitched him on the idea in typical Dick fashion. He goes, yeah, when can I come in? And came in, met with myself and Jon Favreau, and started talking about what a new lyric might sound like that would be specific to this film. And it sort of happened in that first meeting. And the light bulb went on. Dick starts scribbling down some ideas, and I looked at Jon, he looked at me. And I think we both had this look of, amazement and wonder on our faces because, I was sitting right next to Dick, and there's Jon Favreau, and Dick's scribbling rhymes down. What rhymes with this? What rhymes with that? And the greatest thing about that meeting was Jon Favreau described to Richard, well, who is this character? And Jon came up with this. There's this name of this big, huge ape that used to exist called Gigantopithecus was the name of it. And so Jon was sort of describing to Dick all the history of what they had known about this creature. And Dick started writing on Gigantopithecus. I don't want to be ridiculous. He started writing rhymes as we're sitting there. And that's when I looked at Jon, and we were like two kids and, in a candy store going, oh my God, is this really happening? It really was like if we were able to sit with Dick during Mary Poppins and his brother Robert. I mean, what would that be? That's what the feeling was in the room.
Yeah, lots of Disney history there with Richard Sherman. For anybody who doesn't know, Richard Sherman is one half of the Sherman Brothers, who wrote all these great iconic songs for Disney, including Mary Poppins. So that sounds like quite a thrill.
It was.
In your original score for the film, what was the thinking behind it? What were your ideas?
Sure. It had to do some very important things. Jon and I, again, we had a number of conversations about what the score should be apart from the songs. And one of my first tasks was to come up with a couple of themes, the most important being Mowgli's theme. And so I did. I started to write. I started to demo different theme ideas. And lo and behold, in one of our first meetings with Jon, in this very room where I'm sitting, he was sitting in this chair. I played something, a number of things for him, as I always do for directors, kind of getting our feet wet. And there was one in particular that he liked. He goes, I like that. And he kept going back to this one theme, and that became the Mowgli theme. So I sort of got very lucky at first that initially Jon liked a couple of the initial ideas in particular, and one of them became the Mowgli theme. So armed with the Mowgli theme, I had to come up with, of course, the bad guy theme, and I came up with something for our bad guy. And then there were sort of ancillary themes for Bagheera, and they weren't necessarily themes, by the way. They were more feelings, Baloo had to have a sound. The sound of the jungle had to be different. For instance, when we were in Kaa's lair, which is our snake character, so it was sort of a soundscape idea. So there were themes and soundscapes that had to be created. And the overriding directive from Jon was that he always wanted to make sure that the score was timeless, in the sense that he would tell me, and he was right, he would say, if Walt Disney were sitting in the room with us, would Walt like this music? And that was a big flag for me, like, wow, that this has to not be dated, it has to be current, and yet it has to be timeless. So Jon wanted influences of the cultural. He wanted to make sure, obviously, that culturally we were correct and we were giving honor to the culture and when this film was written and where it took place. So there are many influences on the score, but ultimately the score is meant to be sort of a classic score that one could listen to, I'm hoping, 20 years from now and still enjoy.
Well, what's great about the movie, I think, is that, obviously it's based on this classic animated film, but it works in its own right as this, action adventure, coming of age story, a boy in the jungle, right? I mean,
Sure. Yes.
It's not like a live action cartoon. It's its own thing.
Yeah, that's what I'm so proud of, is that ultimately that the film is its own film. And I give all due credit to Jon. Literally, I'm telling you, Zach, honestly, there were vast time frames where there wasn't anything developed on the screen. It was, you know, as you know, with computer animation, things are unformed for a long time. So I would write to things. John would tell me the story verbally, interestingly enough. So he would guide me like, oh no, like there were many times I would get the music wrong. He'd go, I really love the music, but it's not what's happening in the scene. And then he would tell me, and then he would also reference great pieces of literature that had nothing to do with the show, but they gave me an idea of what was really going on. So fade out, fade in, later in the process, when we were getting these fully rendered scenes, literally my jaw would be on the floor, where I would be looking at these 3D images of the jungle and the sounds and the little things off to the right or left of the screen that were just so rich and, quite frankly, surprising how beautiful they were. You know, you almost, for me at least, I hope for you too, I forgot I was in this computer animated world where really the only living thing is the boy. And to me, it's a tribute to the incredible technicians and artists that created this thing with John.
They are stunning visual effects. And one of the things that your music does really well also is it helps create an emotion between this live action boy and these computer generated animals. You know, it helps underline that and make it more realistic. Can you talk a bit about that?
Well, thank you. That's very, very nice of you. To me, that was goal number one. That was goal number one. Goal number one was John. And by the way, John told me, and he'd always laugh with me. He goes, you know, you got a lot to do here. He said, because, you know, there's not a lot of dialogue in the movie, for instance, Zach. There are vast stretches where you're right. It's literally music and this beautiful pastoral jungle or kind of sandy areas and, you know, arid deserty areas. And it all had to be sort of highlighted by the right music. Every step of the way, the music had to kind of indicate or help the audience sort of feel what environment they were in. And that is why literally the music was so specific for the other areas. Like John wanted to make sure that Kaa's jungle, you know, it has a different look. It has a different look than Baloo's area. So the music had to give the environment a feeling. And I thought that was so smart of John to really talk to me about that, because, you know, in many other films I've done, the music serves a purpose of what it should, which is to hopefully highlight and enhance the emotional impact of a film. In this film, it literally almost had to be a language. And John would tell me, he goes, you know, what's the language of Kaa? So we would talk about instrumentation. And I've rarely done that with a director where he's spoken to me about, you know, this sound isn't Kaa, but that bass flute, or he would ask me, what's that sound? And I'd say, well, that's a bass flute. And he goes, that sounds like Kaa to me. And so we would have that same conversation about Baloo. You know, what are Baloo's instruments? One of Baloo's instruments became a tuba. And we didn't use it that often, but the tuba in the Baloo parts, John loved it. He goes, what is that big ponder? I said, well, that's a tuba. He goes, yeah, that's a tuba. He goes, of course. And so it was wonderful. John's a really good musician, by the way. He plays a mean ukulele, and I hope I'm not spoiling it for anybody, but he plays on the soundtrack, and he's really terrific. And anyway, so unlike many films I've done, we had those kinds of discussions, which were really rich. And many times it would take me a couple days to understand what John was trying to impart, but eventually it would come to me, that's what he means. And he was right. He was right all the time.
Well, you two had worked together before, so I guess you start to, when you're working with somebody over and over again, you begin to better understand what they're going for. And in his case as well, better understand how to communicate with you.
Mm-hmm.
So
true. Yeah, true. That helps. If I just comment on that, it helps a lot when you have history with a director because hopefully there's a shorthand that develops. And that's happened with John. I mean, there are sometimes I can almost, we look at each other sometimes, and there's a certain look on his face, and I kind of know him well enough that if it's not working for him, even if he can't describe it, I sort of know. And I also know when he likes something, a little smile will come to his face. And it's a subtle thing, but it's a wonderful thing when you have that kind of connection with someone. I would also add, because I was talking about this the other day in an interview, one of the best wonderful things about having a relationship with a director over a long period of time is that even when I fail, he lets me fail. Like Jon Favreau lets me fail so that I can find the right path. And I think that's an incredible thing. It's an incredible gift that one lets you fail for a period of time so that you can find the right place to be. And John would let me do that. He would tell me quite often, especially early in the process, he'd say, I don't think that's quite right. I like the music, but it's not right for this scene. And he would describe what it is. And so he let me fail a whole bunch. And to me, what that enabled me to do and what it enabled us to do was to be at the end of the process looking at each other on the scoring stage with a beautiful 100-piece orchestra there. And he just sort of nod to me and I would nod to him because it was the journey that enabled us and offered us this incredible gift at the end, which is all the work we did together in this room and in his room was about finding that and being able to fail and then ultimately be able to succeed. And he gave me that gift and he gave me that opportunity.
Absolutely. I wanted to ask you a question about your career because we're an awards website and you've won 3 Emmys. You're an Oscar nominee for your work on The Passion of the Christ. What does that kind of recognition mean for you in your career?
That's a great question. For me, those things are wonderful. I mean, they're sort of affirmations of all the hard work that you put in to your craft. They're not the ultimate prize at all. The ultimate prize for me is, working with a director and being able to record this music and have it touch people. But I will say on the bucket list for me, I've been nominated. I would love to get back. I'm not going to say that it doesn't matter. It does matter. It's sort of, on your list of things to do. Be nice to have an Oscar to put right next to those Emmys, and not from an egotistic standpoint at all, but from just an accomplishment standpoint. It's sort of like, you put your work out. I'm sure you're the same way, Zach. You put your work out there, and if people tend to like it or if it moves them in some way, that's the gift. That's the thing at the end of the day, that the gift for me. But on a list of the bucket list, I'd sure love to win one day and just be able to thank people like Favreau and other people I've worked with and the musicians that I work with and just say thank you. I mean, for the gift of being able to do what I do, something I love. So that would be cool.
Well, I hope you get one day as well. So, John, you're welcome. John, thank you so much, and congratulations on your work, and thank you for taking the time to talk with me.
Thanks, Zach. Let's do it again. Can't wait.
Sounds good. Talk to you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.